Oh, Andrew is unmuted. So, dear friends, welcome. I would like to formally introduce Andrew Wolpert. I think everybody in the anthroposophical world knows this name. And dear Andrew, thank you so much for being a very good friend of Chicago branch and my personal friend. It's all yours. Over to you.
Dear Andre, thank you so much for making this possible and for inviting me and for having such a good welcoming mood around these events. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, greetings, dear friends. I would like to begin with something that doesn't immediately belong to the theme. I would like to begin by recalling something that became preciously obvious for me actually quite recently. If we think about the solstices and the equinoxes, we realize that these four cardinal points in the year, they arise out of astronomical phenomena. And they have a kind of universal, eternal absoluteness about them. The solstice and the equinoxes are something that are given to us out of the cosmos. And it's interesting that the festivals that we celebrate, the four festivals that we celebrate during the year, four of the festivals, come always just a few days after that. So the 21st of December is the winter solstice, and we celebrate the birth of Jesus 3 days after that. The spring equinox is followed then by the Easter festival. The summer equinox, the summer solstice, is followed by the St. John's festival. And the autumn equinox is then followed by a Michaelmas festival. And maybe it's something that you've already thought about. What does it mean that this astronomical phenomena are then followed a few days later by a festival? It's not now appropriate to go into the reasons for how the dates of the festivals were arrived at. But the reality that we experience today is that Christmas comes 3 days after the winter solstice, and so on through the year. And the following thought occurred to me. These astronomical points, these four cardinal astronomical points, as I said, they're given. They have a kind of cosmic, universal, one almost wants to say eternal validity. But in the festivals, we celebrate something else. We celebrate something that is no less cosmic, but it is a cosmic reality that has incarnated in one way or another onto the earth. And it's part of the whole of the incarnation. It's part of the whole story of the continuing and unfinished relationship that Christ has with our human evolution as it manifested at certain moments historically on earth. But the significant thing for me is that although the festivals commemorate something that happened, it is in the very nature of such festivals that we recognize that they have an ongoing, a still unfinished, a still unfully realized dimension. And that strikes me as relevant. If the astronomical phenomena have a kind of finished, predictable, universal quality, they take place anyway. But the festivals allow us to remember something that happened, but the significance of that, the ongoing significance, the fulfillment of the events that we celebrate depends not on the fact that they happened, but on how we work with that unfinished gift we've been given so that it becomes what it is not yet. And that struck me as actually being very pertinent. I would like to suggest that we can think of the astronomical cardinal points as being given in a way by the Father God. And the festivals lie in the realm of the evolving, of the Son God. They lie in the realm of what is still in a process of becoming. And then perhaps one thinks, well, then if one speaks about the Father God and the Son God, where is there space in this paradigm for the Holy Spirit? And I would like to suggest that the Holy Spirit has so much to do with the intuitive capacity that we can sometimes be graced with to know that it's necessary now to do something. And if our understanding of the festivals is not just a grateful memory of what was given, but an awakening to the responsibility that the fulfillment of what was given depends on what we do with it now, ourselves, with each other, for each other, then the possibility of that intuitive contribution to the festivals may be something we can think of as given by the grace of the Holy Spirit. The thoughts that I want to share, the inevitably unfinished, in progress thoughts that I want to share with you, come mainly from a lecture cycle that Rudolf Steiner gave in 1911, From Jesus to Christ. The GA number is 131. But of course, I also draw from things that come from occult science, things that come from the fifth gospel, the lectures that Rudolf Steiner gave on the life of Jesus between the birth and the baptism, and also the work of Sergei Prokofiev. The title of is The Mystery of Golgotha in the Light of Anthroposophy. These are my main sources. And I also dare to say that I will bring some of the things that I'm endeavoring myself to make my own in this wonderful field of spiritual scientific Christology. Just this theme of an understanding of the turning point of time, the mystery of Golgotha, and what that not just means, but what it invites us to recognize today. And I would like to begin by speaking about the supersensible school of Michael. I think on your screens you see Michelangelo's Creation of Adam, and I will come to that presently. But I'd like to begin by reminding you of the significance of what Rudolf Steiner in the Karma lectures called the supersensible school of Michael. And he invites us to understand that from the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, even up into the 18th century, a great symposium, a great coming together occurred in the spiritual world under the leadership of the Archangel Michael. And actually what he did was to prepare those people who had a connection with him, those human beings, but also hierarchical beings and elemental beings. His task was to prepare them for the coming consciousness soul age and the age of Michael, the age when he would rise from the ranks of archangel to become an archai and take responsibility for the esoteric life of the whole world. Briefly, just to recount one aspect of this work of the supersensible school of Michael. Michael had the task to remind all the participants of the whole history of the esoteric development of humanity since Atlantis, to bring the whole of that pre-Golgotha spiritual striving into a context that then understood the significance of the mystery of Golgotha. So a great remembering. And then also his task consisted of allowing those who were with him in this supersensible school to have a glimpse, a vision of a possible human future, a future for humanity. So there was a great remembering and there was a great envisioning. But then also there was the profound experience, we could say the galvanizing experience for those who participated, that if that briefly envisioned future was to become a reality, it would depend on human beings incarnating onto the earth with the will to make the connection between what has been and what may be. And dear friends, many of you will, of course, immediately recognize that this threefold quality, these three main elements to the work of the supersensible school of Michael, then came to expression in the foundation stone meditation that Rudolf Steiner gave at the Christmas conference, where the exhortation is to practice spirit remembering, practice spirit awareness, sensing, it's translated in different ways, and to practice spirit beholding. In this foundation stone meditation, we're given the opportunity to remember how we participated, if we did, in the supersensible school of Michael, and how our work now on earth, amongst many other tasks that we can recognize, is to engage in this remembering, to carry the vision and take the responsibility for making sure that the past connects through what we do now and can serve this vision of the possible future. This is a very brief description of one aspect of the supersensible school of Michael. Can we also imagine that during the activities of this great collection, this great gathering in the spiritual world, can we also imagine that some participants in this school had the initiative, the task to incarnate onto the earth during this supersensible schooling event, had the task to incarnate on the earth and bring some aspects of the content of the School of Michael into public culture as art. So we can think of sculptors, architects, painters, poets, dramatists, musicians. Can we imagine that so much of what poured into public culture during the beginnings, particularly of the consciousness soul age, was brought by messengers, or perhaps even better, shall we say, heralds of the whole of that Michaelic impulse, so that artists like Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, Botticelli, Piero della Francesca, Fra Angelico, Caravaggio, and many others, they had the task of bringing through their artistic work, first of all, what their ecclesiastical patrons expected, some kind of artistic expression of things that belonged to either the biblical narrative or more specifically to the life of Jesus Christ on earth. But that as well as satisfying the expectations of the ecclesiastical patrons, because it was usually the church that made this work possible, there were also private patrons, but that as well as satisfying the, shall we say, the traditional, the liturgical, the ecclesiastical expectations around these themes, these artists out of the supersensible school of Michael brought much more, maybe even more than they themselves knew or even needed to know. And that in so much of the art that came to flourish in this Renaissance period particularly, we can discern not just traces, but positive affirmation of so much of the esoteric content of that Michael school that we now are able to have a completely different, shall we say, a cognitive consciousness of through the work of Rudolf Steiner, or indeed through our memory of our own experiences. And it may be that contemporary with these artists, there were some who were gifted with occult sight. There may have been some other clairvoyant or even initiated individuals at that time who saw and realized what Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael, Botticelli were doing and smiled quietly with great joy because they recognized that in these works of art were hidden, but actually absolutely as an open book, secrets that it would be important for later generations to understand and to discover. And if we feel in some way drawn towards this art now in our incarnation today, if we feel some kind of wish to deepen our understanding of this work, these works of art, then at least I think one can ask the question, am I confronting all this for the first time? Or did I have in a previous incarnation the opportunity to stand in the presence of these works of art and allow them to be soul nourishment for me without necessarily then understanding or even needing to understand them? But today, as adults in the consciousness soul age, and if you join in this Zoom meeting now, I dare to say already with a well-cultivated interest in spiritual science, then maybe you will know what I mean if I say we somehow feel it's not enough as adults to admire the beauty of this art or be amazed by it. There is a deeper longing to be able to understand what it means, a longing to be able cognitively, but with the cognition of spiritual science, to have a relationship of understanding. And on other occasions, I've also spoken about the fact that it is actually the signature of the great Renaissance art, that even when the paintings are complete, and some of them never were completed, and some sculptures were never finished, but even when they are complete, they remain incomplete until we bring our intuitively inspired activity towards them, so that we become co-creators of the unfinished art. Well, these were the thoughts that I wanted to share with at the beginning. And I will now invite you to look at a number of images that are photographs of some of the works of these artists. And I would like to allow these works of art to be the starting point for an exploration of how they reveal something of the esoteric content of an anthroposophical Christology that, as I say, one can find particularly referred to in the lecture cycle From Jesus to Christ. And maybe some of you will be familiar with the term phantom. Rudolf Steiner doesn't use it very often, but he uses it very often in this lecture cycle. And it's a challenge, this term, because both today and in Rudolf Steiner's day, the word, obviously from Greek originally, the word phantom means the experience of something that actually isn't really there. We talk about a phantom limb when it's been amputated, or a phantom pregnancy when the lady is not pregnant at all. You're familiar with this concept of phantom. And so one might at first think that the word phantom, to describe something so essentially relevant to our human being, and I'll say what that is in a minute, you may think, well, what a strange term to use. But on more reflection, I think it becomes clear that, particularly in the case of a phantom limb, I don't want to say anything about a phantom pregnancy, but in the case of a phantom limb, the flesh may have been amputated, but the etheric forces that lived and still have life in that amputated limb are no less present than they were before, though they don't have physical flesh to manifest through. And I think phantom also etymologically comes from Greek, meaning that which appears in the light. So Rudolf Steiner uses the word phantom to describe something very particular. He uses it to describe that which creates and guarantees the human form. So it looks like a synonym of the physical body in the old Saturn sense. This is all very difficult terminologically, because sometimes Rudolf Steiner uses the word physical body to describe the mineral, earthly substance that we see of each other. And sometimes he uses the word phantom to describe what was laid down on ancient Saturn as that which guaranteed the human form. And you'll remember from the Bible this wonderful phrase, and God created the human being in his own image. And it is that image of God, Blake called it the human form divine. And it is that invisible form-giving phenomenon that is referred to in the case of the phantom. And I'll have more to say about that as we proceed. I'm sorry, this is not easy. There is one place where Rudolf Steiner says, trying to understand the physical body in the connection with the phantom and so on is one of the most difficult things in anthroposophy. But I can't avoid it because it's absolutely central to what I would like to share this on this occasion. So you've had the chance to look a little bit at this image from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And if you look at God's right hand extended towards the hand of Adam, and isn't it wonderful that there is a space between the two? Look at the energy with which God approaches this task of ensouling Adam, and look at the lethargy with which Adam lies there. God's right hand is in the abouts of infusing this human being with all the energy that will belong to him. But if we look for a moment, where is God's left hand? Andre, I don't seem to be able to move the picture. Oh, there. No, that goes too fast now. There we go.
Yeah, thank you.
You can see in the crook of God's left elbow, there's a woman who looks at Adam. Maybe this is Eve, who looks at the man who is to be her partner. And look, the whole of God is supported by a host of little angelic beings. They have no halos, they have no wings, but they're energetically engaged in supporting God in his task. And all of them, without exception, almost, are looking in the same direction as God. But if you follow the index finger of his left hand, can you see how it is placed on the shoulder of what seems to be a child, and he alone is not looking in the direction that everybody else in that wonderful cloud-like gesture is looking at. It is as if with God's right hand, he's saying, stand up and be a man. And within his left hand, he's saying, you must wait. Your time will come. And I think it quite remarkable that this picture allows one to see something that Rudolf Steiner speaks about in the lecture cycle From Jesus to Christ. And maybe this is well known for you, or maybe it will be new. If I remember when it was new for me, it was really not just a surprise, it was quite a shock. But I see it as a challenge to find the right way of sharing these thoughts now with you on this occasion. When the hierarchies created Adam, they knew very well that Adam's earthly journey would involve a separation from the original divine, and that the divine image the likeness in which the human being had been created would slowly begin to be lost, and that the human being would lose that originally pristine phantom expression of the divine form. The hierarchies knew that this would happen. They knew that it was an inevitable consequence of beginning this journey towards the possibility of being divine through freedom, not through obedience. And so, as well as creating the Adam that we're familiar with, a second Adam was created and held back, like a twin brother, one could say, was held back in the mother lodges of humanity. This is the phrase that Rudolf Steiner uses, was held back in the mother lodges of humanity so that it could fulfill the task of giving the possibility of the divine human form once again entering into the stream of earthly evolution. There's a picture by Masolino in the Brancacci Chapel of the Church of the Carmine in Florence. And you see here Adam and Eve absolutely unaware of their corporeality, no shame at all. I'm sorry. I don't know, on my screen, I can't see the serpent above. I don't know whether you can see the serpent. Can you see the serpent's head?
Yes.
Yes, good, okay, thank you, because it's not visible on my screen. There's something obscuring it. So here are Adam and Eve in their absolute pristine likeness of the divine. And then the serpent brings fruit. And how important is it to know that that fruit is from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It's not just fruit, it's the fruit from a tree that will give the human being the opportunity to discern good and evil. But the consequence of that, of acquiring that knowledge, of eating the fruit, of taking in the substance of the earth, the consequence of that is the beginning of a separation from that original divine connection. The consequence of that is that the human form divine will begin to lose that pristine divine form. Or to put it in these terms that we now will use, the phantom begins to be damaged. The phantom can no longer maintain the original form. And on another wall of the same chapel, Masaccio then paints Adam and Eve as they are expelled from the Garden of Eden, from the paradise. And interestingly, can you see their figures throw shadows behind them? They're walking into the light and their figures throw shadows. In the previous picture, there's no shadow. In this picture, we see that their physical presence throws a shadow. And we're invited to understand that at this point, if we had had the eyes that we have now, if we had the eyes that we have now and looked at these events, we would not have seen anything, because the whole thing took place in a realm that had not yet descended into matter. At least the human beings had not. And the taking in of the fruit from the tree of knowledge is the taking in of the substance of the earth, and corporeality, material substance, now begins to fill out that form that before the phantom had expressed in a way that would not be visible to our sense perception. And Michelangelo expresses it even more powerfully. You can see Adam and Eve on the left in the Garden of Paradise, completely unaware of their corporeality, no shame. And look how the being who is entwined around the tree seems inseparable from the angel who then, interestingly, with the left hand, drives them out of paradise. But look how Adam and Eve have fallen into their corporeality. So this moment is traditionally known as the fall, and that's usually understood as being a moral fall. Adam and Eve disobeyed God's command. That's the way in which it's presented to us normally. But we can understand it in a very different way. We can understand, yes, it was a fall. It was a fall into gravity. It was a fall into matter. The phantom now had to bear the substance of the earth within its form. And look how Eve and Adam are shown really to have fallen into their bodies. Their corporeal fallen state is what Michelangelo draws our attention to here. And some of you will also be well familiar with this point in occult science, where Rudolf Steiner so amazingly describes this moment in human evolution as not being the affair of humanity, but being the affair of the gods. For centuries, the churches have asked us to believe that our disobedience is the cause of our original sin. One of the wonderfully refreshing aspects of anthroposophical Christology is to be invited to understand that actually what happened at this moment was arranged by the gods. Of course, we carry the consequences of our own imperfect and burdened karma, but we do not carry the responsibility for this deed in paradise, but we carry the consequences of it. And I find that important distinction. We carry the consequences of what happened, but we are not responsible for it. It's amazingly refreshing to realize that we do not have original sin in the sense that church wishes us to believe so, but that we, of course, start each incarnation with the consequences of that moment in our early history, as well as carrying the consequences of that for which we are responsible. I realize that this is all pretty heavy stuff. And particularly now, I'm so aware of the challenges of doing this on Zoom, because if I was in a room and could see you all, I'd have a sense whether or not I can simply now go on, or whether from the way you're sitting or your demeanor would mean that some of this may need to be said again in another way. So please forgive me if this is, if these ideas are maybe challenging, but I would like to go on. So I would like now to show you a series of Enunciations. In the Luke Gospel, the angel comes to Mary. And you remember the moment in the story where when the angel appears, Mary is troubled. Look how Simone Martini expresses Mary being troubled. She pulls the cloak a little more tightly around her, and part of her body seems to move away, though she looks at the angel. Look how Botticelli shows this moment. Mary pulls back. What is extraordinary is, look at the veil around the angel. The position of the angel is absolutely perfect stillness. And yet the way in which that veil still billows attests to the fact that the angel has just arrived. So the way Botticelli paints this angel is a wonderful combination of the consequences of the activity and yet the absolute stillness of the moment of having arrived. Leonardo treats this in a different way. Mary is sitting inside an outside angle of the building. The angel is kneeling on the lawn, and Mary is reading with her hands on the book, on the lectern. And it might immediately surprise you that this rather strange piece of furniture is not on the terrace, but is actually on the grass. And if you look at the external corner of the building immediately that rises above Mary's right hand, you will not be surprised to know that this is the point of the golden mean of the picture. And if you look at Mary's right hand, you can see that Leonardo has done something to the perspective that makes us feel, is this really right? So Mary herself does not show that she is troubled, but what Leonardo has done with her right hand is to create a deliberate foreshortening distortion so that we feel something is not quite right in that picture. I want to mention this because this is part of the genius of Leonardo, that the troubled quality that earlier artists show in Mary's posture, in Mary's position, Leonardo shows in another way. He shows it by deliberately making a distortion so that we feel troubled. This is a picture of the Nativity as it is described in the Luke Gospel. You see the angels above, the shepherds on the right with their sheep. Joseph seems to be asleep. The ox and the ass are there. And Mary attends to her child. This is by Giorgione. Look at the beautiful simplicity. There's nobody else there. There are no crowds. These shepherds come to kneel, and as belongs to the iconography of the Nativity as it is described in the Luke Gospel, the child is either in a manger or on the ground. It's not exactly a stable, but the ox and the ass seem to be there. It seems to be a stone, a cave more. And this picture is by Caravaggio. Maybe this one is easier. This reproduction is easier to see. There seem to be four men on the right in reverent devotion to Mary, who's sitting on the ground and leaning on the manger and holding the child with her left hand. I think this image is truer to the chiaroscuro quality of Caravaggio's paintings, the light and dark. But this image allows us to see more clearly the details. We're in a stable. There's nothing grand. It's very simple, very humble. Perhaps it strikes you as a little strange that one of the four men on the right seems to be less covered. His shoulder and his chest seem to be exposed. I'm very curious about this. So the old bald man with the red mantle closest to Mary, we're told this is Joseph, and the other three are shepherds. I must say, I have my questions about this youngest man whose naked shoulder, somehow he stands out. And I'm reminded of this picture by Caravaggio, where the figure on the extreme right is Christ calling Matthew, the tax collector, to become one of the disciples. Perhaps you can see something of facial resemblance. Now, it might simply be true that Caravaggio used the same model, if he used models, for this shepherd and for the figure of, for the face of Christ. I am inclined to think about it in a slightly different way. This more naked man holds his hands in this gesture of prayer and his thumbs are crossed. I don't know whether you can see that detail. I'm inclined to the thought that unbeknown to the other three who are kneeling in reverence, this fourth one slipped in. And can we imagine that that Caravaggio here is showing us the Christ who has come also to pay his respects to the birth of the child whose task it will be to provide him with the physical, etheric, and astral sheaths for his incarnation in 30 years' time. When we come to the kings, a very different mood obtains. This is from the church of Santa Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. It's a mosaic. And I love the way in which these three magi are depicted. Look at the urgency with which they make their progress. They bear their gifts and they're shown as arriving with such urgency and such enthusiasm. Giotto in the Arena Chapel in Padua paints this picture of the kings coming, of the Magi, and their story is not in the Luke Gospel. As you know, it is in the Matthew Gospel. And as is traditional with the iconography of the adoration of the Magi, the child is now not on the ground, not in a manger, but on the lap of his mother. It is as if his mother is a throne on which this king can sit. I'm also struck in this picture that the third of the Magi is so obviously a woman. This is Fra Angelico. It's in the convent of St. Marco in Florence. And now something else begins to be part of the iconography of this adoration of the Magi. It's not just the three, but there's a company, there's a host of people. There's a whole lot of people are coming to join them. They didn't come alone. We imagine that there must have been a whole troop of them coming. And can you see this man here with his hand to his forehead, shielding his eyes? He's making a gesture that we associate with someone who's looking at something from a distance. And you can see the exotic clothes. This whole train comes from the Orient. And a particular detail of this, we see the three Magi. The one is standing, holding his gift. The other is kneeling down, the red one. And the one with green is prostrating himself at the feet of the mother and child. Again, the child is sitting in his mother's lap. And please notice that his left hand is on the earth. He has put his crown onto the earth, and his left hand is on the earth, and his right hand seems to be gently touching or maybe tickling the right foot of the child. This is one of the most glorious depictions of the adoration of the Magi. It's in the Uffizi in Florence, and it's by Gentile da Fabriano. And there is a narrative in this story. You can see right at the front the three Magi in their different gestures of standing, getting ready to kneel, and then kneeling in front of the child, the oldest man. And you can see behind them there is this amazing throng of people. The whole world is there in wondrous garbs, extraordinary animals, camels, leopards, monkeys. There's a whole host of the world that has followed them to this moment. And if you look here, this panel, and this panel, and this panel, which I will show you in more detail, you can see here the three Magi are standing on a hilltop, and they are seeing the star, and they know that this is what they need now to follow. The second panel, you can see the three of them now not alone, but in a huge company. They're riding into Jerusalem because as kings, they have the respect to show the local king that they have arrived and ask him where they may find the child. And we know the story that Herod says, his advisors tell him where, it's in Bethlehem. And then Herod says, when you found him, come back and tell me so that I too may pay my respects to this child. And then the third of these upper panels, can you see the three are entering the city of Bethlehem? And then they're shown a fourth time arriving here. The ox and the ass are there. Joseph stands behind Mary. There are two serving women behind Mary who are having a little peek into the present that the old man has brought. What is this? They're looking at it. Again, he has put his crown on the ground, and his left hand is on the ground. And his right hand seems to be also making contact with the feet of the child. But now look at the child. His left hand is on the head of the old man. And if we look back at the whole picture, we can see at this moment, the oldest being in the picture is confronting, is meeting, is encountering the youngest being in the picture, and how this young being leans forward, how this child leans forward to touch the old man's head. What an extraordinary balance. Mary and the child are that which gives balance and equilibrium to the whole throng of humanity that is shown to have arrived together with the kings, the Magi. And if we then come to the beautifully and recently cleaned Adoration of the Magi by Leonardo in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, again, look all around here. Look at this amazing throng of people. At least in the Gentile da Fabriano, you could have the feeling all the people knew where they were going and what they were coming to see or what they were part of. But the way in which Leonardo has depicted the throng, and it's clear from studies that have made X-rays behind what is visible here, that there were going to be even more people, even more movement and turbulence, much more than we already see, and there's plenty. We see that this turbulence now has worked in such a way that they collect around the image of Mary with the child, But please now notice the dynamic between the old man on the right, his gift, and the child. Sorry. You remember in the Fra Angelico, there was this man in the distance with his hand here, as if shielding his light to see something from far away. This is a familiar human gesture. And look what Leonardo has done. He's given that gesture of looking at something that is far away to one of those who is absolutely closest. So this old man has his left hand on the earth. With his right hand, he is proffering the gift. The child is receiving the gift with his left hand, and with his right hand, he is blessing the old man. And what I want to suggest is that Leonardo works with the iconography here in a particularly developed way. I don't know what the oldest of the three kings brought, whether it was myrrh, gold, or frankincense. Myrrh, because this child had a destiny to experience human death. Frankincense, because he was a god, and gold, because he was a king. Let us imagine that this oldest of the Magi is offering the gift, which is the gift of gold. The left hand, iconographically, shows from where this comes. The left is the receiving hand and the right is the giving hand. So my imagination around this particular dynamic between the old man and the child is that with his left hand, he is showing the gold that I offer you comes from the earth. It is the residue in the earth of the old sun. But I'm not offering you simply a lump of golden ore. What I'm offering you is the way in which we have taken this old sun substance out of the earth and made something treasured, something beautiful, something crafted. It's an object of beauty. And I offer this to you, this old sun substance, and I offer it to you with my right hand, because I know that you are the being who represents the destiny of the new sun substance that is coming to the earth. So this old man takes from the earth something of the old sun and offers it as a gift to the child who has a destiny in connection with the new relationship to the sun being. And look how Leonardo paints the right hand of the child blessing the old man and the left hand in the appropriate gesture of receiving the gift. So I think many of you will be familiar with the differences between the story of the kings and the story of the shepherds. Oh, sorry, before we go on. So the kings, the kings are warned, the Magi are warned in a dream, don't go home but via Herod, don't go and tell him where you have found the child. They're told in a dream to go home another way. And so they do. They get in this depiction in the baptistry of Florence, they're shown as being taken another way by boat. So this picture by Leonardo, which is in the Louvre Museum in Paris, is an opportunity now to go a little bit more deeply into the difference between the story of the birth in the Matthew Gospel and the story of the birth in the Luke Gospel. And I would like to say a little bit about that because I think it belongs to our understanding of this journey from Bethlehem to Jordan, from Jesus to Christ. So if you become involved, if you start reading the gospel stories in Matthew and the gospel story in Luke, certain very significant differences become unavoidably present. I mean, simply the style in Matthew, it's a very clear description of one event after the other. It's really a sort of a report of what happened. Whereas if you read the Luke gospel story, there's a much more mysterious, almost mystical quality to the way in which the story of the birth of Jesus is connected with the birth of John, and everything takes on a much more intimate, I don't want to say mysterious or mystical, but it has a more inner quality. The Matthew account has a masculine directness. The Luke account has a more feminine interior quality to it. The details in the story are very different. In the Matthew gospel, the angel tells Joseph that his wife is going to have a child. In the Luke gospel, the angel comes to Mary. In the Matthew gospel, they live in Bethlehem, and the Magi come and pay their respects to the Holy Family in a house. In the Luke gospel, they actually live in Nazareth, and they have to come to Bethlehem for the purposes of the census, the tax, and then they go back to Nazareth, and the birth is described as taking place in a stable. There's another interesting aspect to this. We see from the pictures that we've looked at that when the kings arrive, there is a whole host of beings with them, and their arrival must have been something outwardly gorgeous and splendid, a very public arrival, and yet their departure is private. They're told to go home another way. So they leave quietly, one would almost like to think in secret. And with the shepherds, it's just the other way around. They come out of the message that the angels have brought them. They come, they find their way, one imagines quietly and diffidently, not with great show, but diffidently. They come to the stable and they pay their respects. The Caravaggio picture is beautiful in that respect. Then you remember this short phrase in the Luke Gospel that when the shepherds have given their gifts and made their reverence to the child, they look at each other and they say, we have to tell people about this. This must be known. So there is this wonderful difference. The kings arrive publicly and grandly and leave quietly. The shepherds arrive quietly, but their task is to make this event known. We think also that the Magi, they know how to read the significance of the star which they see in the night with their day consciousness. The shepherds are asleep and they have the message from the angel at night, but in their sleeping consciousness. The Magi come to pay their respects to a child with whom they have had a long connection to. Because in this child, whose birth is described in the Matthew Gospel, there incarnates an individuality that has had many, many incarnations on earth. And since the expulsion from paradise, has worked through all the many different mystery streams to overcome the consequences of the separation from the divine, to begin to heal the inevitably damaged phantom that every human being on earth has. This child who is born, whose birth is described in the Matthew Gospel, is a child whose individuality has incarnated many, many times and who is experienced as an incarnated being on earth. Whereas the child whose birth is described in the Luke Gospel is a being that has never incarnated on the earth, who doesn't have an ego that has been through successive previous incarnations, but this child carries within him that second Adam that sister, brother, what should we say, that twin Adam that I spoke about right at the beginning, when the creation of Adam actually was a creation of two Adams. So in this child whose birth is described in the Luke Gospel, we have a child who brings with him the possibility of bringing the healing into human life on earth through the twin Adam that has not been affected by the consequences of the fall. And so if we take seriously the way Rudolf Steiner describes all this, we're invited to understand that there were actually two families and two Jesus children. Apparently the names Mary and Joseph were quite common, so it's not impossible to imagine that. And that these two children were born maybe a few months apart, and that these two children grew up, both in their own way, preparing for the moment 30 years later, when a physical body would be sufficiently prepared, a physical, etheric, and astral body would be sufficiently prepared for the Son being, for the Christ to incarnate at the age of 30 through the baptism in the River Jordan. It's not an easy story. And maybe, I remember when I first encountered all this, I thought, why does it have to be so complicated? Why on earth does it have to be so complicated? And actually, the answer is in the question, because it is on earth. And our incarnation on earth means that there are certain, shall we call them laws? There are certain conditions that absolutely belong to the possibility of our continued evolution. You could put it another way. You can say God doesn't have to break the laws of nature to bring about the divine cosmic purpose of our human evolution. And in this picture by Leonardo, there's a poor copy of it in the National Gallery in London that is not by Leonardo. This is by Leonardo. In this picture, you can immediately see that there are two children. And the monks for whom this picture was painted were very angry with Leonardo because they said, it's not clear which is John and which is Jesus. We don't accept this picture. Please paint a different one. And the one that was then painted, maybe partly by Leonardo, but by no means entirely, the one that was then painted and accepted is the one in the National Gallery in London. And there you see one of the children has a cross and is obviously John. And then the woman with the red garment behind her is then obviously an angel. But in this picture, this is not an angel. What looks like a wing behind her is actually, when you look at it carefully, a part of the rock formation, but it's painted to look like a wing. And the one in London is quite obvious, and the one in London is quite obviously a wing. So the one in London satisfies the, shall we say, the traditional expectations of the monks that this is an angel who's supporting the little child that is the Jesus child, and the other child is then John the Baptist. But that was not what Leonardo wanted and is not what he painted. What he painted here is a very different picture. And it seems very, very, very beautifully clear that in this picture, we're invited to recognize that there are two children, that the two Jesus children are shown here. And look at the one that Mary has her arm round, her right arm round, the child on the left. Look with what practiced accustomedness this child kneels on the earth. That's a gesture that shows a practiced relationship to the earth. Look at the other child who is sort of precariously sitting on the edge of the rock, needs to steady himself with the left hand, but is of course supported by the woman, it's not an angel, by the woman whose left hand supports him. And then look at the relationship between the two women, how the left hand of the central Madonna has this blessing gesture over the little one who's sitting precariously on the rock, and how the woman who is supporting him with her right hand points to the other child. And there's another remarkable feature of this picture. If you look at the child who is kneeling so practicedly, look at his hands. They're in a gesture of reverence. And look at the right hand of the other child. It's in a gesture of benediction. But their relative positions actually belong to the other gesture. You would expect the one who is lower would be in a gesture of reverence, and the one who is higher would be in a gesture of blessing. But here we see absolutely the genius of Leonardo, that he brings about an active equilibrium, an absolute dynamic balance. The higher child, the one who is slightly higher, has the gesture of one who looks up, and yet he looks down. And the lower of the two, the one who is lower, you would expect to look down on the one he is blessing, looks up. So we see a symbiosis, we see an interdependence, we see a mutuality here. There's no doubt for me whatsoever that this picture is the picture of the two Jesus children, and the way in which they belong together is so subtly alluded to by Leonardo. Just to look at the Michelangelo again, what God's left hand is holding back may be that which comes to birth. It's not the child, but that which comes to birth within the Luke child, the Jesus of Nazareth, who is in this gentle blessing gesture as he looks up to the Nathan child, the child whose birth is described in the Matthew Gospel. This cartoon, it's called a cartoon because it's on a large piece of paper as a preparation for a later painting. This cartoon by Leonardo is in the National Gallery in London. And again, it's enigmatic for lots of reasons. Look how the younger woman seems to be sitting partly on the lap of the older woman. And look how the two children relate to each other. And how the left hand of the older woman rises in this gesture of one between and above the heads of the two children. It seems to me that also in this preparatory sketch, for a painting that actually then ended up being different, it's in the Louvre in Paris, how in this preparatory sketch, Leonardo is also exploring the symbolism of how these two children have a common destiny, and of the two, that between the two, something of oneness will arise. So Raphael paints many pictures of the Madonna with two children, and it is always John and Jesus. John, you can see, is immediately recognizable by the little garment he has, and he's actually holding the cross with both hands, and Jesus is just holding it with one hand. There's another picture where Mary is there with two children. John has now taken the other position. He's kneeling and he's looking, he's holding the cross. And Jesus, the mother, and Jesus is looking at his mother. In all these pictures by Raphael, where there are two children, it's very clear that it is not the two Jesus children, but it is John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth. And yet in Berlin, there is one picture by Raphael, just one, where 3 children are painted. It's not a picture that is very much spoken about. It's clear that the child to our left, on the right side of Mary, is John the Baptist. But the other 2 children also have halos. And, well, it can perhaps just remain a question. Well, the story of the 2 Jesus children has further details that maybe it's important just to mention. That the 2 families grew up, one in Bethlehem and one in Nazareth. And it so happens that the Joseph of the Matthew Jesus dies and the Mary of the Luke Jesus dies. And the Matthew Mary then takes her son and also her other children to live in Nazareth with the father, the widower of the Mary who has died, whose birth of her son Jesus is described in the Luke Gospel. So Rudolf Steiner describes the way in which these 2 families then come together, and that the 2 children, together with the siblings of the Matthew child, then all live together as a family. This picture by Botticelli in the National Gallery in London is called the Mystical Nativity. And I wanted to include it this evening because I find it interesting that there are some pictures where the shepherds are also present in the background when the Magi come and adore the child. But nevertheless, usually they're quite distinct. It's either the Magi or it's the shepherds. But what Botticelli has done in this picture, I'm now trying to imagine what lived in him as a yearning. He yearned to bring these 2 stories into some kind of unison, into some kind of unity. And on the left of the picture, you see there is an angel who's bringing the kings to this cave. And on the right side, you see there's an angel bringing the shepherds. So that what I feel lives in this depiction of Botticelli's is the longing that these 2 be united, that they be brought into a dynamic together, that they be brought together. That's what I discern as one aspect of this picture. I wanted also to show you this very well-known painting by Raphael, it's known as the Sistine Madonna, because this is Pope Sixtus IV who built the Sistine Chapel. This is Barbara. And I wanted to show you this picture because I think none of the pictures that Raphael paints of Mary and the child or the children, none of them is a kind of Bethlehem Christmas birth picture. None of them really is. There's no hint of a stable anywhere. Sometimes there is a Joseph, but they're not really Christmas pictures. And there is a tendency that one wants to say, these are pictures of the birth of the Christ child. Even in German, the Oberrufer, what we call in English, the shepherd's play, is called the Christgeburtspiel, the play of the birth of Christ. And I'm always a little bit sort of taken aback when I hear that, because it's so clear that we're talking, in the case of the Bethlehem Christmas events, of the birth of 2 Jesus children. Christ was undoubtedly present in some way, caring for the events that would serve his destiny. But actually, we're talking about the birth of the Jesus children in the case of the Matthew and the Luke Gospel. And yet, this painting by Raphael, I feel, is the one where Mary is with a child that I feel I want to be able to say, she is holding the Christ child. not because Christ was a child, but because what she brings and what she offers in this picture, it's not Bethlehem, there's no stable, there are no shepherds or kings, but what this Mary being is holding tentatively, maybe offering to us, is childlike in its beginnings and Christ-like in its immensity. I feel this is one painting where one can really speak about the Christ child. So the Luke Gospel then describes an event that took place when Jesus was 12 years old. The Luke Gospel tells the story that Mary and Joseph, together with a company of many other families and presumably also their children, went to Jerusalem for a festival. And having completed whatever it was that they were to do there, they then left and began to go home. And on the way home, the parents realized that their son, Jesus, was not with them. This is the nightmare of all parents, that you leave your child in a supermarket or that you forget to take your child home. It's almost unimaginable that Mary and Joseph could be guilty of leaving their child or not realizing that they left without him. There are various ways in which one can explain it. Maybe there was a whole throng of people and that somebody had the responsibility for the children and Jesus was not among the group. So Mary and Joseph go back to Jerusalem, to the temple where they had been, and they're then absolutely surprised to see that the child, Jesus of Nazareth, was totally different to how he had been in the last 12 years. In the description that Rudolf Steiner gives in From Jesus to Christ, we can understand that this child who had no previous earthly experience brought a kind of innocent wonder, lack of experience, a kind of innocent naivety about the world, no practiced understanding of what it is to be living in a physical body on earth. And when they come to the temple and they see their child, they're amazed because suddenly this child is able to speak in such a way that the learned doctors and priests in the temple are listening with rapt attention at the wonders that this child speaks. And you see Mary and Joseph on the left, and you see the child amongst the doctors of the church. And Ambrogio Borgognone also painted this picture. It's in the Church of Sant'Ambrogio in Milan. And Borgognone adds something that belongs to this esoteric mystery that I was speaking about at the beginning. You can see Mary and Joseph on the left leading a child away. But you can also see that Borgognone paints two children in this picture. He paints a robust, confidently seated child speaking to the elders in the temple. And you see that the other child has somehow lost the vigor, has become a little bit smaller, maybe, is a little bit weaker. I suppose you could think that these are two pictures of the same child. While he's sitting there, he is fulfilling the possibility of speaking in the way that he can. And then when his parents call him, he goes home and he somehow goes back to his original state. You could understand the picture in that way. You could also recognize that the two Jesus children are depicted here at a very significant moment in their biography. If you look at the right hands of the two children, they're in a very similar gesture, but the left hands are very different. The description that Rudolf Steiner gives of what happened when Jesus of Nazareth was 12 is the following: that the child whose birth is described in the Matthew Gospel dies. That is to say, his physical and etheric bodies separate from the astral and the ego. And the ego of that child, and you remember I tried to characterize this individuality as the one who has had so much experience of what it means to live through many incarnations on earth. And not only that, but through all those incarnations has endeavored as much as it was possible before the mystery of Golgotha to overcome the consequences of the phantom no longer being a pristine representation of the image of God. This individuality who lived in the Matthew child is an old individuality that has endeavored through the whole of the history of humanity on earth to become the human being striving to regain the lost image of the divine, who brings with him the immensity of the accumulated experience of wisdom. And it is for that reason that the Magi come to pay homage to the one who they recognize as their teacher in more than one incarnation. And when this child, the Matthew child, dies at the age of 12, his individuality enters in to the physical, etheric, and astral sheaths of the Luke child. And suddenly, this child, who until then seemed inexperienced, incapable, unversed in earthly things, although he displayed immense love and purity and innocence in the best sense until that moment, when the individuality from the Matthew child enters into this Luke child, the Jesus of Nazareth, is filled with the capacity now to speak in such a way that these wise and learned priests and doctors at the temple are able to recognize something of immense wisdom. This is again, not an easy aspect of the story of the two Jesus children, that in these two children, two very different things come to the earth. In the Matthew child is born the accumulated mystery wisdom of all ages. In the Luke child is born the unsullied, the still pure Adam quality before the fall. So when at 12, these two come together, it is as if all that the Matthew individuality can impart to the Luke child begins to work and transform this. We can no longer call him a child. He grows up. Jesus of Nazareth grows up. And in the 18 years, isn't that interesting? It's a moon node. And in the 18 years between this event at the age of 12 and the event of the baptism at the age of 30, there begins to take place, I don't want to say a fusion, an interactive dynamic between what the individuality of the Matthew child can impart to the being of the Nathan being, the being of the child whose birth is described in the Luke Gospel, and who carries within him, in a kind of embryonic seed form, the pristine human phantom that is waiting now to play its part in human evolution. And when Jesus of Nazareth is 30, he makes his way to the River Jordan to be baptized by his cousin John. And in the fifth gospel, Rudolf Steiner describes Jesus's passage from wherever he's coming from to the River Jordan as being one of uncertainty. Rudolf Steiner says that in this coming to the River Jordan, there was a risk that Jesus of Nazareth would not make it, because immediately prior to this event, the individuality that had been the individuality of the Matthew child, that had lived in the Luke Jesus of Nazareth for 18 years, withdrew. That ego withdrew after it had done its work in permeating the astral, etheric, and physical bodies of Jesus of Nazareth, so that they would be prepared now to receive as ego, the Christ, the Son being. So it's an extraordinary story that this child is born with a kind of innocent simplicity. At the age of 12, this experienced ego principle enters in, and for 18 years works to prepare this Luke individuality, the Jesus of Nazareth, for this moment when he is 30. But in order to make way for the incarnating of the Christ, the individuality that had been in the Matthew Gospel has to withdraw. And it is one of the few places where all four Gospels describe the events in extraordinarily similar words. That Jesus is baptized by his cousin John, and it's known as Epiphany. Epiphany is a Greek word, it means the manifestation. And it's an epiphany, it's a manifestation of the Trinity at this moment of the baptism, because it also is the feast of the adoration of the Magi. Some people think it's the epiphany of the child to the Magi. Well, maybe, but much more interestingly is it to understand that at this moment, all four Gospels describe how the Father is present in his voice. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. The Holy Spirit manifests as a dove, and the Son manifests as incarnating into the body of Jesus of Nazareth. This one is by Fra Angelico in St. Marco's in Florence. This one is in the Uffizi gallery. It's by Verrocchio, who was Leonardo's teacher. And as is well known, Leonardo painted this angel, and Verrocchio was so amazed at the skill of his pupil that when Verrocchio painted his angel, he painted his angel looking admiringly at the angel that Leonardo had painted, not looking at the event that is happening. And similarly, there's good reason to believe that Leonardo may be responsible for much of this central figure, and that Verrocchio was painting John the Baptist. And there's something very beautiful about that, because you remember the lines of John the Baptist: I must decrease and he must increase. And Verrocchio was one of these great teachers who was not jealous of the fact that his pupil showed far greater promise than he himself was capable of. So this John baptizing Jesus is a recognition: I have a task to prepare you for a greater destiny. And that actually lives in the whole being of Verrocchio's relationship to Leonardo, and it comes to expression in this painting. And finally, I would like to show you a picture of the baptism that is in the National Gallery in London by Piero della Francesca. You can see on the right of the picture, someone is taking off his shirt, and therefore his head is obscured. And can you see behind him, there are priest-like figures looking up at the sky, and they are reflected in the water in such a way that their heads are not visible. So we don't see the head of the young man who's getting ready to be baptized, and we don't see the heads of the old kings, the old priests who are standing behind. We neither see their heads very clearly, and particularly not as they are reflected in the water. One of the most amazing things about this picture is this: the baptism took place in the river Jordan. And if there's one thing we know about a river, is that it flows. And yet in this picture, we are shown Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, shall I say, standing in the riverbed that is dry, and immediately behind him, the waters have come to a kind of stillness. Look how the cloud reflected in the still water. It's very beautiful. So look at John the Baptist. I want to think of the bowl that he's using as made of clay. Might have been wood. I want to think of it as clay. So what is John the Baptist doing? He has taken some earth, which has been fashioned into a bowl, and with this earth, he dips it into the river Jordan, which has become still for a moment because of this immense cosmic, human, earthly moment. And he's pouring the water on the head of his cousin, Jesus. That is the only flowing water in the picture. My imagination is that when John has taken this water from the river and baptized his cousin with it, then suddenly the river can flow again. But it is as if all the life forces in the waters of the world are still for a moment. And when the baptism has taken place, everything will flow in a new way. Now, there's another aspect of the dynamic between John and Jesus. John is doing something, and Jesus is allowing something to be done to him, to happen. So at first, one might think that John is the active one and that Jesus is not the passive, but the receptive one. John is doing something, something is being done to Jesus. So you might expect that Jesus is the one who is in a pose of stillness and John who is in a pose of movement. And the longer you look at this central part of this picture, the more clear it becomes that actually something totally different is being shown. John is in a poise of perfect balance. Look how his right arm is balanced by his left leg, and how his left arm affirms the solidity of his right leg. You could almost imagine that he could stay there for a long time. And when you look more carefully at the way in which Piero painted Jesus, you can see that his hands are not perfectly symmetrical. His shoulders are not at the same level. His hips, his knees, and his feet, the whole of his body is painted in a dynamic of asymmetry, almost symmetry, but not quite. And my imagination when I look at this is that at this moment, the human being, Jesus of Nazareth, was not simply standing still and allowing this to happen. It must have been an immensely moving experience. It must have been the case that Jesus was somehow moved in every possible way, trembling, shaking, to be baptized in this way so that the Son being can enter in. Must have been a profoundly moving experience. And with this, we come to the Epiphany, which belongs to the River Jordan, which belongs to the end of the story of Jesus of Nazareth as such, and the beginning of the story of Jesus Christ, which then goes through the next 3 years until the crucifixion, the entombment, the descent into the earth, and the resurrection on Sunday. Take this whole phantom theme to another level. Well, that might be the subject for a future presentation. But what happens at this moment in the resurrection, in the baptism, is that the Christ enters into the body of the human being, Jesus of Nazareth, that brings within it the sibling the twin of the original Adam, the pristine phantom, ready to play its role through the next 3 years and on in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And the body of this Jesus of Nazareth has been prepared for the immensity of this task through the 18 years in which the being that the Magi came to pay respects to out of the whole of the history until then lived for 18 years preparing this, that which came out of the future in a way could be ready as an instrument for this moment when the Christ incarnates into Jesus of Nazareth. It would be another theme to speak about the 3 angels on the left, particularly the one in the middle, who looks with such eagerness at the event, and how the other 2 seem to restrain that angel from something that is going to be that angel's task, but is not yet so. Well, dear friends, if you're still there, and I have no idea whether you are, I've taxed your patience and your endurance perhaps a little by going on for so long. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for allowing me to share these unfinished thoughts and considerations that I hope do rightly belong to this Holy Nights period, which is in a way a journey from Jesus to Christ. Thank you.
Dear Andrew, thank you so much for your highly artistic presentation. And it looks like we are slowly moving to questions and answers section of our meeting. And my question, shall we have 2-3 minutes break to have a sip of water and stretch our legs and be back? Andrew, how do you feel? Are you exhausted, or shall we make a break?
No, I'm very happy to meet people with in a conversation. Absolutely.
Okay, let's begin. Dear friends,
but just a moment, Andre, can you change the configuration? We don't need the picture anymore, and I would like to see.
Yeah, dear Andrew, you should stop the screen. Yes,
okay.
You are back. Excellent, yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much. So, all right. Okay. Today to use chat window. And if you would like to ask a question, please type a little Q. It will be enough. So we will create a virtual line and we will know who will be first, who is second, because we have your names. Yes, you can begin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, dear friends, please go ahead if any questions to Andrew. It's many, thank you. Many thanks to Andrew.
No question.
And this is Q question from Nisha, and Nisha from London, I believe, right? Nisha, go ahead, please unmute yourself.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hello, Nisha.
Hi, Andrew, you're right. Sorry, my question is very simple. What's the difference between phantom and doppelganger?
No, doppelganger is something else. Doppelganger it just means a double, and it may be a pleasant or usually an unpleasant experience of a part of us that we have not yet worked through, maybe, or a part of us that seems to have a kind of haunting presence. It's not a theme I've worked with very much, but the doppelganger is, it's a part of us that we carry with us that we have not yet transformed. And so it has connection, obviously, with the phantom in a certain way, but it's not the same thing.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so Andrew Linnell. Andrew, you have raised hand. Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Yes, well, I actually decided I wouldn't ask this, but Andrew, thank you so much. I'm very appreciative of all the insights into Leonardo and the other painters that you showed. In particular, Piero della Francesco's baptism. I wanted to just also give you the idea that perhaps the river is holding its breath.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, yes, that's a wonderful way of describing it, Andrew. I love that. Thank you. It's somehow as if, you know, the clouds in the sky represent water that is still, it's not raining. And the clouds reflected in the not moving water, it's like the whole of the waters of the cosmos are holding their breath, so that this event can then release, be allowed to release. And you imagine after that it will rain and the river will flow. Yes, holding their breath is beautiful. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. So Blanca Ponik. Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Hi, it's just a question what I've written. Like as far as Christ's present, like life on earth, was the moment of baptism, could it be looked at as a conception? You know, when one conceives a child and then the...
Yes, in a sort of symbolic way.
Okay.
But normally the word conception, I mean, it's a beautiful word because I can conceive an idea in the same way that a woman can conceive a child. It's wonderful the way the language recognizes the affinities here. But I would want to keep the word conception really for what both Marys experienced when they conceived their children. The moment of the baptism, I think I would rather use the word incarnation. But, you know, incarnation is not a moment. It's interesting. If we're looking for a moment, we end up with a series of points. If we're looking at a sequence of points, we end up looking at a moment. It's very beautifully paradoxical and confusingly confirming. So the incarnation is not just a moment. It's a whole process that you could say also begins with the pre-earthly deeds of Christ, way back in Lemuria and Atlantis. The incarnation begins there. But I think what we can recognize with the baptism, I mean, I understand why you're asking about conception, but I think I would rather say this is the moment when the incarnation makes its connection with substance, with matter. Now the Christ being actually enters into an earthly relationship to the human being. So I prefer, I mean, I understand why you asked the question, but will you permit me to say I feel the word it is the significant moment in the incarnation. But you know, the crucifixion and the resurrection are no less significant in the whole process of the incarnation. But at the moment of the baptism, the Son being makes a connection with the physical mineral corporeality of a human being for the first time.
Yeah, yes, thank you. That's actually in embryo. It's the same, where the individuality, we connect with the physical body. And can one say that the incarnation, you know, took 3 years? Mm-hmm. Anyway, those are good things to ponder, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Blanca. And dear Valdemar from Brazil, São Paulo. Yeah, please unmute yourself, Valdemar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening for you, or good afternoon for us.
Good evening, Valdemar.
We are at the end of the afternoon. I have 2 points. First of all, I would like to thank you very, very much. You know, it was very, very nice hearing you and seeing all those pictures and your interpretations. I have 2 points. The first one is that I don't like to call the event at the Jordan River an incorporation, an incarnation, but as an incorporation. you know, just to make the distinction to an incarnation when somebody is born, right? And the second point is that I have the impression that the event at the Jordan River was an almost death experience by Jesus. So even his etheric body left quite a bit the physical body, you know, like in almost death experiences. But all those pictures depicting the baptism don't show the Jesus immersed in water. I think John immersed the people in water until they almost died, you know, and as an initiate, he could perceive if the person was still there, you know, and not at the moment of dying. You know, it's an almost death experience, but this is not shown in the pictures.
Thank you, Valdemar. There are earlier pictures, particularly in the Byzantine tradition, which show an immersion, but not a complete immersion, but up to the chest in some cases. But both the things you say, I'm very grateful to hear. Yes, it is an incorporation. I mean, it's an incarnation. I understand why one would want to make the difference. And that the baptism had the quality of giving up something so that something else could now take place. If you want to think of it as a death-like experience, where the human being is taken through something of an similar to an initiation through immersion in water. Yes, beautiful. Thank you, Valdemar.
Thank you so much. So John Stephen, Evanston, Illinois. John
Yes.
Stephen, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Andrew, it was an unforgettable experience witnessing your masterful presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Early, when you were speaking of Michael and the supersensible soul, you said some things. You said, here are some of the words you said: a possible human future, a great envisioning. If that briefly envisioned future bridge what has been and what may be. And could you speak more to that? You seem to be suggesting something that goes to a whole nother world.
Yes, yes, it certainly does. It really goes to another world. Well, yeah, one could say so much. Maybe just this, that the gods have intentions and aims, but whether or not they are realized depends now on what they've given to us and what we do with them. I mean, this is one of the most awesome, terrifying aspects when you come new to anthroposophy. You are expected to understand that the future of the whole of evolution, not just human evolution, but the whole of evolution, depends on what human beings do with what they have been given, what we do on Earth. So we have to say that über Geist erschauen, practice spirit beholding, is to look at a future that we cannot in any way imagine is guaranteed. It's a future that depends on whether or not we rise to the potential that is ours. So it's also interesting because this German word über Geist erschauen, this at the beginning means to bring energy into your looking. It's not simply beholding vacuously or wondrously. It's a beholding that has an energy in it. Erschauen. So you know how if you carry an image with energy, it helps it to become a reality. I think that's also what lives in the word erschauen. So it's in the same, über Geist erinnern. It's not just a kind of passive recalling, but there's an energy in the remembering. Then it's über Geist besinnen. So this is the one that is translated in so many different ways. I like very much the idea that it should be understood as practice spirit sensing, because sensing means to be able to take in and also to know the meaning of what we're taking in. Again and again and again, particularly around 1922, 23, 24, Rudolf Steiner speaks about the significance of the human being realizing that the connection between the past and the future depends on what we as human beings do. It's not given. What has been given has a potential, but whether we realize that potential depends on us. And I think that was inevitably a part of the school of Michael. So look, this is where we've been, and look, this is where we might manage to get to, but it all depends on your will to incarnate onto the earth again and again and again, and to create the connection between this remembered past and envisioned future. And I said briefly, because we can look at the past in great detail, because it happened. But the vision of the future is necessarily fleeting and brief, because we don't know what the details will be. And maybe the details are not known. They depend on what we do. I don't know if that helps, but I love the fact that we tell children stories that have a happy ending. They all lived happily ever after. So, you know, this is very often described as being a very inadequate preparation for life that is full of tragedy and divorce and illness and untimely death. Why do we beguile children with this notion of a happy end when actually we should be preparing them for a brutal life where there isn't always a happy end? You hear this from people, perhaps you're familiar with this. And the answer to that is very clear, that the fairy stories are not a preparation for life. The fairy stories are a reminder of the experience that the child still brings with them from the spiritual world, where that potential future, I don't want to say happy end, where the realization of our full humanity is something that we still have a glimpse of. And when the child comes down to earth and hears these fairy stories, it is an earthly reminder of that vision of a possible future that the child still brings from the spiritual world. And if it works powerfully, it becomes the means by which it's possible not to give up, I don't like the word hope, not to give up confidence that there is a meaning in a different kind of future, even if now it doesn't seem so easily attainable.
You are moving the possibility more towards the realization.
Yes. And that's why I like wish more than hope. Hope somehow suggests, well, it may happen, but it doesn't really depend on me. I'm just sort of being optimistic. But if I wish for something, there is my ego is in my wish.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dear Andrew, it's almost 10 o'clock in London. How do you feel? You feel fresh or?
Yeah, we can go on as long as people are interested.
Okay, so Simonetta, please unmute yourself. Where are you from? This is a question for you.
Simonetta is from Rome.
Hello,
oh, from Rome.
buonasera.
Excellent. Thank you.
Buonasera
yeah,
from Rome.
What is your question?
Yes, no, I just wanted to share a slightly different way in which I saw the Piero della Francesca baptism. Andrew, you were saying that in your mind's eye, you could see the waters, the river had dried up previously, and then it would be filling with water. And I instead saw it as the river being behind Jesus, and then in front of him, there's the path which he has to tread as the Christ henceforward. In other words, a before and an afterwards. And I saw that clearly depicted by Piero della Francesca. That was how I saw it. I'm not saying that is how it is.
Thank you. It's lovely to hear his name pronounced in perfect Italian.
Piero, well, you do pretty good, well yourself, I have to say.
Piero della Francesca.
Sì.
Brava, grazie.
Prego.
Thank you so much. So Florian, are you next, Florin, are you from Honolulu, Hawaii, right?
Yes, Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Andrew, for your great presentation. And I wanted to remember yesterday we heard how January harkens back to Janua, the Latin word for the threshold.
Yes.
And that we have the god Janus, who has two countenances, one looking into the past and the other into the future. And I recall Rudolf Steiner providing an insight into how the Sophia being, who you could say overlights these events in the past, he indicated that the Sophia being was able to maintain contact with humanity in that period due to the last vestiges of two types of clairvoyance that were still active in the shepherds and the kings at that time, but that were dying out. So that these were individuals who represented the last vestiges of a past clairvoyance that in the meantime has been extinguished. And Steiner spoke of how the clairvoyance centered in the head of the kings has become metamorphosed into the abstract thinking of modern times. It can no longer reach the spiritual world, lost touch with the logos. And that there is a potential to renew that by raising thinking to the level of imagination, which anthroposophy, of course, helps us to accomplish. And in the case of the shepherds, that this faculty would descend into the kind of sense observation that modern science is stuck in. And that if we break through, like Goethe did, to inspiration, we could renew the gift of the shepherds on a new level. And then, of course, in the foundation stone meditation, at the very fourth part, Steiner gives an impulse how these two aspects of the shepherds and the kings need to be united in each individual in order to prepare the future. And one could conceive that this is a way of reconnecting with the Sophia, who overlights our time in terms of a kind of world Christmas that I believe is upon us, as depicted in the book of Revelation, as the woman standing on the moon, crowned with the stars and clothed with the sun, so that we can participate in a cosmic birth. But just like the kings were threatened by Herod's dark figure, that Herod figure has become the dragon that wants to devour the child and prevent that birth. So that we're in a kind of cosmic tension, you could say, a cosmic drama, I believe. And learning from the past can help us to renew it on a new level, because the Sophia overlighted and incarnated in these two Marys, you could say. And that's sort of the archetype of our soul that can now connect with the second coming in the etheric as a potential that's been laid as a seed in each one of us. Anyways, I was wondering if you could say something about that, how all of this relates to the present, to the present time.
Well, I mean, you've said it all very beautifully and very fully. Thank you. There's one thing we could add to that. You characterize very beautifully. I think it's the Christmas lectures of 1920 when he speaks about what you were saying, the Isis Sophia lectures, I think they are. There's one aspect that one can add. You characterized very beautifully how the quality of the capacity of the kings to clairvoyantly perceive the astrology in the astronomy has become the kind of dead thinking in our heads, and how the capacity of the shepherds who have this intuitive relationship to the earth, to what the earth was longing for. The shepherds bring something of the longing of the earth, and the Magi bring something of the knowing out of the past. And the way you so beautifully characterize the way they change is also the basis for creative thinking, because what the shepherds' capacity developed into the way we look at nature is the beginning of our capacity to have percepts. And the way in which what the kings brought was metamorphosed into the thinking in the head is the beginning of our capacity to have concepts. And it's absolutely sort of basic in the philosophy of freedom that we know something when we bring a concept to a percept. So it is the metamorphosed gifts of the shepherds and the kings that become the basis for us not to know because we have been told, but to know because we cognize, we awaken to the thinking activity that brings knowing about. And again, particularly in the esoteric work, Rudolf Steiner speaks about the importance of creative thinking. And that creative thinking is possible for us today because of the metamorphosed capacities that you so beautifully describe of what the shepherds and the Magi brought at that turning point of time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Andrew, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. So yes, I know 3 people raising hands. Yeah, but Yaya is raising her actual hand, and Brenda too. So next is Nivenka Paris. Am I right? I'm sorry if I'm spelling wrong.
Yeah, that's all right. I will be.
Where are you from? I'm sorry.
From Vancouver.
Oh.
Andrew, could you please comment in more detail about the evolution of the 2 Christ children?
No, 2 Jesus children.
Correct. Thank you for the correction. Secondly, is there any chance to have your majestic slides?
Yes, I mean, they're not mine. I just got them. Some of them are photographs I took myself, and some of them are from the internet. You have to ask Andre. Andre, is this event being recorded?
Yes, we are recording this session.
And when you record it, are you also recording the images or just the sound?
No, everything.
So the answer to your question is, please ask Andre. I'd be very happy if he makes available to you the images. Yes.
Excellent. And lastly, you spoke German language beautifully, and therefore I would like to say, ich danke Ihnen von ganzem Herzen.
Bitte schön, ganz vom Herzen meinerseits.
Dankeschön.
Yes, Brenda, please. Brenda, please unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead. Yes, I know you're holding hand. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute. We cannot hear you. No. You should manage by your mouse and unmute yourself. Not yet?
Yeah.
Yes, all right. Excellent. Welcome.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Brenda.
Yes, go ahead.
No, now you've muted yourself again. Brenda, Brenda cannot hear you.
Twice.
Yeah.
Will that do it?
Yes.
I think I'm.
Yeah, now speak.
Okay, I will. I'll try to use my English accent. I live in America, in Maryland, and I have to say it was my husband who was he passed away a year and a half ago, was the anthroposophist, and I sort of tagged along, if you will. So I came to this lecture to see if I could learn a few things, and what I was behind the whole library of David's books, many of them anthroposophical books, which I'm going to donate to the Steiner Library here in America. But going back to your lecture today, I really appreciated it. I loved the artwork, some of which we had seen when we traveled. My I don't know whether it's a question. It was what I loved was the reaffirmation that we were not, as so many churches tell us, born into sin throughout. You know, it was part of the whole plan, as it were, that what happened to us in the Garden of Eden, of course, it's a mythological thing, but so can you comment a little more on that? Because I know that someone out of the church has written a book called Original Blessing instead of Original Sin. I don't know whether you know of that book. I forget the author. I'm so sorry. I'm a bit ignorant on these things. But can you comment a little more about how you view the fall, as it were, in quotes? Or sign up.
Yes, Brenda. Well, I'll try and say in maybe slightly different words what I endeavored to say earlier this evening. In paradise, we were in a state of goodness by simply inevitability. We were good because we were in the Garden of Eden and everything was good. But that was not a goodness that was in any way free. In order to become good freely, it's necessary to take a risk, get entangled with everything that belongs to the risks and dangers of living on earth. And that's indeed what happened. And the gods knew that very well. They did not want to keep us in paradise forever obedient and good. The gods, the hierarchies, wanted us to embark on a journey that was risky, but a journey that would possibly lead to our being, I don't want to say good now, shall we say achieving our full humanity freely. But the gods also knew that that journey entailed losing some of the connection with the divine. And the way in which Rudolf Steiner describes the phantom in From Jesus to Christ is that the phantom underwent a change. It was no longer the pristine representation of the human being in the image of God. And that was the necessary price for the entanglement with matter and the risk of everything that belongs to the temptations and the dangers of leaving the spiritual world and coming to earth. But that coming to earth is the only basis upon which we can achieve freedom. So it was a fall. It was a fall, but not a moral fall. We are not responsible for that. The church wants us to believe that we were disobedient. I mean, you can look at it from another point of view. God said, there's all the fruit in the garden. You can eat any of the fruit, but the one tree you can't eat the fruit of is this one. Well, you don't have to be a very developed child psychologist to know that that's the certain way of getting the child to eat the fruit when he thinks God is not looking. If God hadn't wanted us to eat of that fruit, he would have put it behind hedges and he'd never have drawn our attention to it. You can see that there's an absolute clear divine purpose in this. And we bear the consequences of having fallen into matter, but it was not a moral fall. It was purely a descent into a corporeality that entails coming to earth with all the risks and dangers, but the possibility also of achieving freedom freely and being human, not out of automatic compulsion, but out of choice, if we make it. Thank you for the question, Brenda.
Thank you so much. And Yaya from London. Yeah, Yaya, please unmute yourself. Unmute, just manage to unmute.
Yeah, done it. Managed this far. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Andrew, for the absolutely enlightening presentation that you offered to us. Something that caught my attention to start with was at the beginning when you were talking about the spiritual school of Michael. It seems to me, and I could be well wrong, that in that fleeting moment when the future was sketched, there was a pluridirectional potentiality for this future that has been entrusted upon us. And because we are at the turning point between the year past and the new year, I think that for me, what we need to do, what I need to do, is to reawaken with the energy that you mentioned in German and that I cannot reproduce in any way, but re-energize the awakening of our pre-birth intentions in order to step into the future with maybe not full confidence, but with the degree of confidence that will allow us to make the future a reality. So I see this, yeah, that's all.
No, it's not all. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Yaya. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I just wonder if the word sketched is right. You imagine Michael with a pencil and a notepad and saying, look, chaps, this is what the future might be like, and I'm going to sketch it for you. I'm all for trying to imagine this as really as possible, but I see it less as a sketch, as really a vision. A vision. There's a wonderful line from Novalis, from Heinrich von Oefterdingen, and it goes like this. I'll say it in German first. Was du glaubst, es sei geschehen, kann man erst vom Weiten kommen sehen. So what you think you have achieved is actually what you see coming towards you from the far, from the distant future. So often we have this sense of, yes, yes, I've got it. And this sense of achievement, what you think you have achieved is but an intimation of what is still coming towards us from the future. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, dear friends, it's pretty late in London. So it looks like we have 2 more questions. Let's make it blitz. I mean, very, very short. Neil, please unmute.
Neil?
Yes, Neil. It's Neil. Sorry, it's a hard name to pronounce. It's got 2 L's at the end. So Andrew, very, 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 very thankful for this. It's an excellent overview, and I love your emphasis on epiphany and beholding. And you probably know this, but in the King James Bible, behold is used something like 500 times.
Yeah.
And there's that lovely statement by Christ, behold, I make all things new.
Yes.
And it is all so important about beholding. And the other word you emphasized about remembering, of course, the central Christian act is that Christ states, do this in remembrance of me. And it's astounding how that obviously was in Plato with his whole concept of remembering, and that we take the ideal world into the physical. And you did a wonderful job and a wonderful overview, and I thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Neil. Thank you.
Victor, yes, go ahead. Please, very, very short. Victor? Victor Toso.
You have to unmute.
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. I was haunted particularly about the 2 Jesus.
Oh.
No, you're muted. Unmute.
Yeah, unmute yourself, please. Sorry,
okay.
It's my fault. Okay. Go ahead, sorry.
All right, sorry about that. I was haunted, I guess, mostly by the 2 Jesus children. I forget the artist, but it's the one where it looks like Mary's ushering the Matthew Jesus child out of the room, and the one is sitting in the throne, if you will. And there seems to be a light transfer from the one who's just given up his being to the one who's now sort of enthroned in wisdom.
Yes.
I mean, there's something tragic about that figure leaving. And, you know, if you were the one sitting on that pedestal now with the new wisdom, how would you speak to that child who has just given up his youth and all and is departing? something, I don't know, deeply tragic to me in that. And I don't know if there's, I don't know what happens to his etheric body. He's obviously going to die. Is it?
Yeah, so I understand the question, and Andre exhorts us to be brief. So let me just say this. In that picture, it's by Borgognone, and you can find it on the internet. It's called Jesus in the Temple, and if you put in Borgognone or simply Sant'Ambrogio in Milan, it will come up. So you'll be able to see it. I can't recall the picture. I can't bring the picture up now so easily. But as to your question about what that means, notice when you look at the picture that the child on the throne is looking with immense love at the other child who is leaving. The child on the throne is not glorying in the adulation he receives from the masters. He's actually looking with immense love at the being who has sacrificed something of himself so that he now can fulfill their common task of serving the incorporation or the incarnation process that is already beginning at this moment. And of course, a death is always sad, but a death does not have to be tragic. If the human being who dies has fulfilled what it was that that human being came to earth to do, then of course it will be a sad event for those around. But it doesn't have to be a cosmic or karmic tragedy. It may actually be a release from a body that has now fulfilled its task so that the next step can happen. And that is indeed the way in which we're invited to understand that this individuality went on to have many other tasks. So the death of the Matthew child is a release, having completed a task, to be able to take on new tasks, but always in the service of the Son being.
Thank you for that compassionate answer. That's very good.
Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, dear friends, I think it's time to finish our session. And dear Andrew, many, many thanks from Chicago branch and for our whole anthroposophical community for your presentation, for your gifts to us. Yeah, dear friends, please feel free, unmute yourself and say thank you by your live voice. And yeah, we're looking forward for the future to deal with you. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for facilitating this and being so patient and efficient in the way you do this. Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you so much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andre
Thank you.
and
Thank
Andrew,
you. Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank
Many
you,
thanks.
Andre.
Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So wonderful.
Happy New
Thank
Year.
you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. It was very wonderful.
Night.
Right.